child, I found the thought of the end of the world terrifying. And I think it's the same reason why the youth fear death. It's the thought of things unaccomplished, things never experienced. I always feared that if the end of the world came, I would never get married, and I would never have kids, be successful, or retire to Hawaii. I remember growing up in Flagstaff, Arizona, and hearing the train whistle go by in the middle of the night, and be afraid that it was Gabriel blowing the horn and calling all of God's children back to heaven. Now, 20 years later, I find that the end is so much different than I thought it would be. I have read the Left Behind books and have familiarized myself with Christian lore about the rapture and the tribulation and all the end times. The problem I see with it is the idea of a grand gesture. The rapture, a peace treaty that takes place in the Middle East, the tribulation, the rebuilding of the temple, the rain of fire, the sun being blotted out, and Yahweh knows what else. This has always been the normal expectation of the end. However, while I was in Christianity, I understood one fact. That in Acts chapter 2, Peter stood up and said that in the last days I'll pour out my spirit upon all flesh. That this was prophesied in Joel. And that at Acts chapter 2 at Pentecost when the breath of Hashem was given, that in Acts chapter 2 when the breath of Hashem was given, this was the kickoff point for the end times. By the words of the prophet Joel, we've been in the last days for over 2,000 years. This is why people sit around waiting for the end to come. They're waiting for the gong to sound so they can jump off their horses and ride off to fight the good fight. Yet the end has already come, and for most of them, they're already working for the bad guy. Yes, I understand the concept of the thief coming in the middle of the night. However, that is in reference to the return of Yeshua, because the thief in the night that came for the apocalypse has already come and gone, stealing everything he could before he left. This is all part of the deception. Why not keep them waiting for a grand gesture while you can fleece them in their sleep? The truth is, the grand gesture that ushered in the end time has already come and gone. Daniel's missing week has been found and accounted for. The 7 years mentioned in Daniel was never supposed to be the 7 years of tribulation, but rather a time of rejoicing, then and now. When Daniel was given the 77, Yahweh laid out what would happen at the end of it. After 483 years, Yahweh talked about the coming of the Messiah, which most theologians would agree on. Yet in the middle of the passage about Yeshua, all of a sudden they stop talking about Yeshua and now they're talking about the Antichrist. And then they talk about him for a few seconds and then all of a sudden they're talking about Yeshua again. Just as quickly the topic was brought up, the topic got changed back. The passage said that in the middle of the 7 years, the final 7 year to 3.5 year point, that a man, assuming to be the Antichrist, would break covenant. Some translations say confirmed, but what baffled my mind is the text of the entire chapter had been ignored. Daniel had told at the end of the 77s that Yahweh would put an end to the sacrifices. That doesn't sound like the Antichrist doing. That sounds like something else. But the hang-up that most people have on that chapter is he will set up the abomination that causes desolation. It says that after the anointed one is put to death, that a ruler would rise up and destroy the temple. Well, Yeshua did say that when you see the abomination that causes desolation coming, that you flee to the hills, pray that it's not winter, and pray that your wife is not pregnant. Yeshua didn't look at Matthew and Luke and say, write this down for the people 2,000 years from now, for they're going to need to know this stuff. In truth, he was talking about when Rome came to destroy the temple some 40 years later. Yahweh orchestrated the destruction of the temple, saying, no more sacrifices. This is the end. The end. My son died, resurrected. There is no more sacrifices. He is the sacrificed lamb. And the destruction of the temple was the exclamation point, that final line in the sand that says, it is over. It is finished. The covenant of the Old Testament is complete, and the covenant of the New Testament begins. 7 years played out like this. At the beginning, Yeshua was baptized. 3.5 years later, he was crucified, dead, and buried. He resurrected, and having established a new covenant of grace and the breath of Hashem, ascended into heaven. At the end of the 7, after the breath was given, Stephen was martyred. There was a sign in the heavens, and you could see Yeshua standing at the right hand of the Father. Paul was converted on the road to Damascus. Paul became known for his ministry to the Gentiles. Meanwhile, Peter was given a dream at Cornelius, saying that do not call what I have called clean unclean, saying that the ministry is now time to go to the Gentiles. This stating that at the end of the covenant with Israel, the old covenant was over. He had divorced Israel and now had moved on to the Gentiles, opening up the new covenant for the entire world, that the Jew then could be drafted into. One of the greatest deceptions and distractions from the devil that comes from this is that the end is coming and not yet is. If we know our history better, so much of the Dark Ages have been lost to our history books. We could have seen the seal judgment, the trumpet judgment, the bowl judgment, and all the little creepy critters and crawlers that would have come with it. We know this. The sun was blotted out by Mount Vesuvius when it exploded near Pompeii for almost all the world for several days, not 10 years before the temple was destroyed. Prophecy had been set into motion a long, long time ago. Read the book of Revelation along with the understanding of the Mazzaroth, the prophecy and the stars set up by Yahweh, and the whole saga will begin to make sense. Revelation is indeed written out of order as it occurs in the stars. Now the naysayers will say that I'm putting a twist on the prophecy to fit my own agenda. But doesn't the writer of Revelation say that let he who has wisdom understand the words of these prophecies? Now we're in the time of the beast, Tartarus, with its horns down headed toward Gemini, the twins, the two witnesses. Orion stands between them, the messenger, yelling at Pallades upon the back of the beast, the church, to get off of her, to come out of her, my people, and be separate, come into the hair underneath, and the charioteer above Orion, the charioteer that would take away the church, the true chosen one of Yahweh, before the collision with the two witnesses. Who is this beast, and why has he marked us so? If the Antichrist was not foretold in Daniel, then what did Paul mean when he introduced him? First things first, the beast. Because if you can't accept who or what he is, then you'll never be able to embrace the idea of who the Antichrist is.